Good afternoon, everybody. Hi. So nice to be back with you for this soul food installment from the Mesilat Yesharim. It's kind of the week before Pesach. We have a couple of days before Passover, and I'm really excited to begin preparations for Pesach with you all. I'm sure all of you've been getting ready anyway, but I just wanted to have a good time learning some Mesilat Yesharim, learning some of the path of the just for our lunch and learn today. And for those of you who have been following us, we're in the third chapter, Chalkiha Zehirut, concerning the divisions of watchfulness. So essentially, the Mesilat Yesharim, the Ramchal last week, pointing out that the first rung on the ladder of self-realization is what's called Zehirut in Hebrew. Zehirut, to be Zahir, means to be careful. So here, I think that the Ramchal is pointing towards mindfulness, that being aware and being fully focused in the present moment and fully focused in our lives to the best of our abilities. We know that it's almost impossible to be fully Zahir, to be fully mindful, without mirrors, without friends, without therapists, without support groups, without communities. We need all of those things. We essentially got to page 35 and last week, and then we went over to page 36, where the Ramchal had introduced us to a statement from the Chazal, from our Chachamim, from our sages in the Talmud, who said, "Noach lo la'adam shelo nivra yoter misha nivra." An amazing conversation in the Gemara. Is it better to have been born or not at all? Is it better to have been born or to have never been born? To be or not to be, that is the question. Or maybe to be or not to be before birth. What would have been ideal? Now, the Talmud kind of decides, at least in this iteration, that it would have been better off, Noach lo la'adam shelo nivra, yoter misha nivra. It would have been Noach. It would have been better. I mean, the literal translation is it would have been more comforting. It would have been easier, which might not necessarily mean that it would have been better not to have been born, but it seems that the simple meaning of this text is that birth, incarnation, to be incarnate, to have been born in the world, it might have been better to have never been born. Meaning, maybe it meant for the rabbis that this world is so full of pain, so full of suffering, that perhaps it would have been better had we not been born. But maybe it also means that the rabbis believed in some, that before we were born, we were living in some blissful state, that we came to the life trailing clouds of glory, as the poet says, that that the involution from spirit to matter might not have been our first choice. I mean, there's certainly there's room to laugh at that, because certainly most human beings have had a moment in their lives where they thought, wow, it might have been better had I not been born. Not just Jimmy Stewart in It's a Wonderful Life, but, maybe it wouldn't have been better to have been born. And, but now that we are here, the Talmud says that we have two possible recourses. Some say that we should yimashmesh b'ma'asav, and some say yifashfesh b'ma'asav. One says we should let him, the Talmud says one opinion was let them examine their deeds, and then the other one said let them feel their deeds. And the Ramchal thinks that both of the answers, both of the suggestions for how to live a good life, the differences between them are actually mutually supportive, right? So the Ramchal says both of the responses in that Talmudic statement, that now that we're already here, what do you do with your time here? You fix your life, you evolve your life. And he says that they're each meaningful. Both of these opinions that are brought in the Talmud, in Eruvin, are both good advice on how to live a good life. So I'll pick up again back on page 35. 34 rather, page 34. In the Hebrew, Noch lo adam shelo nivra, yoter mishenivra. It would have been better for us not to have been born than to have been born. V'achshav shenivra, but now that we are born, we are alive. Yifashfesh b'ma'asav v'ike de'amre yimashmesh b'ma'asav. There are some who say, now that we're born, let the person examine their deeds. And there are some who say, not examine, but feel their deeds. And then the Ramchal says, both of these opinions are legitimate approaches to leading the good life. V'tir'eh, sheshnei lishonot heim shtei azharot tovot u'moilot me'od. It says, listen, both of these, the language of both of these are good pieces of advice and helpful. They're both beneficial. Both versions are helpful. And what does pishpush meaning to examine? What does examining our deeds means? He says, listen, there's the gross level of looking at our lives, right? Even within it, we can see when we're not leading, when we're doing things that are just not in our best interests. We're staying up too late. We're not eating healthily. We're not exercising at all. We don't spend any time meditating. We don't spend any time aligned with our deeper purpose. If we're observant Jews, it would be a simple equation. A cheshbon would be something like this. Are there things in my life where I'm just not being shomer mitzvot? I'm not observing the commandments, the mitzvot. I'm not keeping Shabbat. I'm not lighting candles. I'm not praying every day. I don't really feel aligned with the Torah's prescriptions for what it is to be a good Jew and a good human being. So you can look at the more gross element of it and say, okay, make a checklist. What's my spiritual checklist? And then he says that that's one level, but then mishmush, feeling your into your life. Mishmush on page 36, line 2. המשמוש הוא החקירה אפילו במעשים הטובים עצמם לחקור ולראות היש בעניינם איזה פנייה שלא טובה או איזה חלק רע שיצטרך להסירו ולבערו. He says, והרי זה כמשמש בבגד לבחון הטוב וחזק הוא או חלש ובלוי. He says that mishmush, the second way of understanding what one should do now that one is in the world, is supportive. He says they build off each other. They're not actually they're not disagreeing about what is the path. He says examination is what we do with our general life, but mishmush is much closer. It's like touching a garment and seeing what it feels like. He says that mishmush is the chakira, even in the good things that we're doing, to see, to investigate and see whether or not where our intentions are, not just the external behavioral level, what's the inner place. So it says all of this is in the category of zihirut, of mindfulness. So mindfulness would be to work from the gross level of day-to-day behavioral life, looking at my actions, my daily activities, and seeing whether or not they are aligned with spiritual principles, with my spiritual life. And that would be zihirut, or mindfulness of behavior. And we would use that mindfulness to try to correct the imbalance in our life. And then pishpush would be analogous to not just mindfulness of behavior, but mindfulness of states of mind or intentionality. How pure is my intention? When I go to pray, is it to become a great rabbi, a great leader, a great meditator, where the ego subtly slips its way into everything we do, so that even the things that we are doing for the sake of becoming clearer and more liberated, there are vestiges of slavery of some kind or another that are mixed in together with our actions. And so for the Ramachal, there is a progressive level of subtlety in our mindfulness practice. There's mindfulness of the gross level of behavior. And then there are mindfulness of even the behaviors that we have deemed skillful and healthy, to try to cleanse them as well, to purify them as well. It's kind of an interesting approach. I mean, that could be your whole mindfulness practice at this stage of zihirut, of being mindful. What am I doing? And then once I've already worked on aligning the behavior with my intention, how do I then become more aligned with the actual ritual itself, so that I'm not slipping in all kinds of, baser motives, right? And not because we want to chastise ourselves, or not because we want to be perfect, but because when those things are mixed in, it in some way, it doesn't liberate us, If all the ego wants to do is shift from the world of ambition for money, let's say, and I have nothing against ambition for money, but let's say that's where the ego rests. And then now the ego says, no, I'm going to leave Wall Street. And I have nothing against Wall Street. Thank God for Wall Street, parts of it. But I'm leaving that track now to become a spiritual adept. I can't tell you how many people shift their neuroses from the world of the ego to the world of yoga and to meditation. They just schlep all of that with them. And even in wholesome activities, which by definition could be a vehicle for liberation and for freedom, can itself become a repository, a place where people hide their dirty laundry, as it were. And so he's saying mindfulness or watchfulness would cover both pishpush b'ma'asim, right? Ferreting out and discerning which activities are healthy, which activities are wholesome, which activities lend themselves towards greater spiritual evolution. And then even a deeper level of mishmush, of feeling the garment of our activities to see what in them is pure and how we can strengthen that clarity while we lower the volume on the ego and we lower the volume on those other elements. In the second paragraph on page 36, the Ramchal says, Klal hadavar, the general principle. יהיה אדם מעיין על מעשיו כולם ומפקח על כל דרכיו שלא להניח לעצמו הרגל רע ומידה רעה, כל שכן עבירה ופשע. He says, the general principle is that we should be investigating all of our actions to see and to be alert, right, on about our behaviors, where we don't allow ourselves to have habits that are unskillful or character traits that are unskillful, even more so overt averot and pesha, which are terms for a sin, God, or a crime. Here he means really obvious, right? It's not just the cleansing or the purity of the habits, but really to become aware of the way that we expend our energies. That's the first level, mindfulness. Now, it's amazing to think that this could be, in some theory, it could be the whole practice could be mindfulness, right? The whole practice could be summed up with mindfulness, right? But here for the Ramchal, it's just the first stage, right? Mindfulness is just the first stage in his system. It's just the first stage. We'll get to the later ones, God willing. V'hineni ro'et tzorech le'adam. I, says the Ramchal, see a need. I personally, says, it's very interesting, the words here, I see a need for us to make an accounting, a daily measuring and weighing of our behaviors and our mind every day, he says. Like socharim gedolim, like great merchants, asher yifalsu tamid al kol iskehem leman lo yitkalkalu, like great merchants who spend so much time they're evaluating their undertaking so they don't have something that goes awry. So like they have set hours every day to check their weights, so that the weight, right, they're not erroneously charging somebody or being or being cheated out. So he's saying that the weighing process of our own daily activities in life shouldn't be any less important than great merchants who are constantly checking to make sure that their scales are appropriate. Because he says having kvi'ut means regularity, or something. Keva means that you have a regular time every day where you go over your day. This is a wonderful advice. We have apps for so many things. We have like an app for fitness, My Fitness, great app. I love that app. We have apps for everything. We should have an app for my daily accounting of deeds app. Like, what did I do today? Were there things that I made? Where were my mistakes? Where were my? How do I score myself in terms of both choosing behaviors today that were in my best interest and in alignment with God, or in alignment with my highest spirit, my highest source. And then not only that, if I check intentionality, go back over the things that I did that were in alignment, and to see what was motivating me, what were my mind states while I was having that, would be a wonderful practice to go to cleanse the day that way before we go to bed, to do a cheshbon, to do an accounting. Right before you say the Shema, before we say the Shema when we go to bed at night, as a mindfulness practice, we can just go over the day and see where we got caught, where were our choices coming from. And that would be an application of this wonderful suggestion. וחכמינו זיכרונם לברכה הורונו בפירוש צורך החשבון הזה. והוא מה שאמרו ז"ל, על כן יאמרו המושלים באו חשבון, על כן יאמרו המושלים יצרם באו לחשב חשבונו של עולם, הפסי מצווה כנגד שכרה ושכר עבירה כנגד הפסדה וכולי. He says, this is alluded to very clearly in the rabbinic wisdom in the Talmud, where the rabbis interpret a verse in Bamidbar, in the book of Numbers, where it says, Al kain yomru moshlim bo cheshbon. It says, therefore, the rulers say, let us enter into an accounting. And so the rabbis in the Talmud, they interpret that verse, therefore the rulers over their inclination, over their evil inclination, over their negativity, they are the ones who rule over that, are the ones who always are saying, let us enter into a cheshbon, let us enter into an accounting of that has cosmic significance, meaning the reward of doing the right thing over the loss incurred in doing the doing the right thing. Let's weigh this. וזה כי העצה האמיתית הזאת לא יוכלו לתת אותה ולא לראות אמיתה אלא אותם שכבר יצאו מתחת יד יצרם. He says that in order to be someone who wants to be mindful, you know, mindfulness itself is only a skill set that one seeks if one is already to some degree has some separation over their unskillful inner world. Meaning, like if I have a Yetzer Hara, when I'm in my Yetzer Hara, when I'm in the throes of unconscious life and my wanting to be disconnected from awareness, which everybody has, because it can be painful to be aware. We want to shut it down. We want to numb ourselves out. We want to cut off from being fully alive to some degree. We want very much to be alive, but we're also afraid of it. And so mindfulness is a practice that those who have some degree of separation from that sleepy place say, oh, I want more mindfulness. I want more wakefulness, right? The moshlim b'yitzram, those who already have some awareness that their yetzer, their evil inclination, meaning the place inside of me that it does battle, right? The part of me that wants to go back to sleep, the part of me that wants for it to be all about ego, the part of me that wants it to be work from fear instead of from love and compassion. That part of me has to be, to some degree, I have to have some space from it, so that I want to raise up mindfulness in order to limit that voice, to limit the voice of the Yetzer Hara, to limit the voice of ego, to limit the voice of let's go back to sleep, that voice. Kima on page 38, Kimishu adayin chavush b'ma'asar yitzrov, because someone who's in the heat of their stupor, or in the heat of the throes of that energy that wants to be not mindful. When we're in the throes of that place, we don't see the truth of mindfulness. We don't see the utility of mindfulness. We can't even recognize it, he says. For what we call in our religious tradition, the yetzer, the inclination, the evil inclination, or that part of us that wants to stay asleep. It won't let us feel how good it feels to be awake, to be mindful. They won't even let us see it. It blinds our eyes, he says. Misamet einav, mamash. You really can't see it. Man, I can't even tell you how true this is. I'm sure all of you who are going to watch this know the truth of this. When we're in the throes of a pattern that we can't shake, we're in the throes of the release that we need in order to feel alive, even though we know that it won't ultimately be healthy for us. In those moments, we are completely blind. Completely blind. We don't want to hear anyone say, oh, don't do that. That's not good for you. don't have that. Like an addict, right? We're in the throes of our addiction. If anybody were to say to you that you can't have a drink, they'd say, "What? We don't see it. Are you crazy?" And then we get some spaciousness from it. When we're not completely, thank God, something happens or somebody helps us or something, we hit rock bottom in our lives and whatever we're doing, and we say, "Oh, I need more mindfulness because this thing that comes over me, this mind state, this place, or this voice, or this bodily experience is so overwhelming. I need more mindfulness, otherwise I can't combat it. Right? I can't bring enough light to shed on this darkness." And to some degree, there needed to be a Moshe who came along now, connecting this to Pesach, the Passover. A Moshe had to come from the outside, someone who himself wasn't brought up in slavery, someone from the outside who could recognize how deeply embedded the Israelite slaves were within a culture of slavery. And Moshe came from the outside. He didn't grow up with slavery. He didn't grow up in the house of slaves. He grew up in the house of freedom, of control, of power. He was the adopted son of the daughter of Pharaoh, a woman who had the courage to defy her own father at threat of death, I'm sure. And he learned what it was to reach outside of the comfort zone. But he himself could only do it because he wasn't in it. So he came and brought this fresh awareness, and of course, they fought him. They didn't trust him. They didn't recognize him. He wasn't always skillful in the way that he spoke with them. And they had a lot of slavery within them. And they could say with one mouth that they wanted to be free, but then they weren't willing to do it, or they made it difficult. They were resisting their own freedom, which is something that we all do. And so here comes the Ramchal, and he says to us that in order for us to be awake and we need to have, right? If you're already reading this book, I'm going to imagine the Ramchal would put you in the category of somebody who's Moshel B'Yitzram, somebody who has some control over the unskillful voice, or the voice that isn't always the most wholesome voice. And so we create mindfulness and skillful practices in order to combat the blinding that the Yetzer Hara, the Yetzer, the inclination, tries to blind us to. And he says, right? V'nehu k'olech b'choshech. It's when you are in the throes of some pattern. It is like you are walking in the dark, and in front of you are obstacles, and you can't even see them. That the Talmud in Baba Metzia, in the tractate Baba Metzia, the Talmud also interprets a verse from Psalm 104. You laid down darkness, God, and it was night. The rabbis say that the darkness here is a metaphor, it's an allegory for the darkness of this world, of this physical world, that it feels like the evening, it feels like dark night. He said, understand how wondrous this saying from the rabbis is, if we were to take time to really deepen our investigation of their interpretation. That night, the darkness of night, can cause two kinds of mistakes to human vision. One is that if it's super dark, right, not in New York City where it's never dark, but where it's really dark, right, outside of the city where it's really dark, it can be so dark that you don't see what's in front of you at all. That it's completely, you're completely in the dark. You don't see what's in front of you, and you might, knock into something because it's right there, because the Lila is so dark, the evening, the night is so thick that it completely obscures any vision whatsoever. That's one kind of mistake that darkness might cause vision. And the second one he says is, he says, or the night can be so confusing to us, is that it actually doesn't stop us from seeing something, but it confuses what we see, and we wind up seeing something that isn't there, or we think it's something other than what it is. So night can either completely obscure our vision, or it can actually confuse our vision. So we see an amud, some kind of post, as if it's a person, or a person as if it's a post. And we're completely, either way, we don't see what's in front of us. And then he says, the allegory here, of course, is, he says that really, that's this world, the world of the physical. King Chomriot, the Gashmiut, Olam Hazeh, that this world, the physical world, can be darkness to the eye of the mind. I always wonder when I read this if he's taking this from Bonaventura, who spoke of three eyes: the eye of flesh, the eye of the mind, and the eye of spirit. The three eyes, the vision of the body, right, that is able to see physical objects, and the ein haguf, ein hasechel, the eye of the mind, which is that you have conceptual mind. It can know what Pythagorean theorem is in the mind. And the eye of spirit is to be able to behold with the eye of spirit things that even the eye of the mind can't see. And so here the Ramchal says that this physical world might work for the eye of the flesh, but it's confusing to the ein hasechel, to the eye of the mind. The gorim lo shtei ta'uyot, echad eno maniach lo shirei hamichshol asher b'derech ha'olam. He says the eye of the mind can be darkened completely, or it can be confused. In the way that it's darkened completely is that we don't even see any of the obstacles in our mind. We can think that the world is just this world. We don't even have, the world can completely convince us that there are no obstacles, that there's just this world. We don't imagine any depth. It's just surfaces. We don't even see the obstacles before us. And he says it doesn't even let us see anything that in this world might be an obstacle to an awareness of what's beyond this world. And he says that the fools, they walk along securely, and they never ever, they're lost. They're not even afraid. They're not even on the level where they're afraid of the obstacles, because they don't even see them. They don't see anything in this world as an obstacle because they're not aware that they're in the dark. It's just the darkness of this world, and that's what it is. That's all there is. They don't even have that, what he calls the pachad. They don't even know what is there. And he quotes a verse now from Proverbs, Huma shamar hakatuv derech ha'shaim ka'afela lo yadu b'mei kashelu, that the way of the evil ones is like night. They don't even know upon what they are stumbling. He says, quotes Proverbs again, that the fool becomes infuriated and is secure. For their hearts are completely steadfast. They feel bari, they feel healthy. It's clear. Ka'ulam. It's as clear to them. They fall before they have any knowledge. So they don't even know that there's an obstacle. It's complete darkness. They are completely in the world of living without any mindfulness. They're in this physical world. It's all they seek. It says, and the second kind of darkness is even harder, more ubiquitous, more insidious than the first one. He says what's even worse is when you are convinced that the world has obstacles, that the world itself is full of these barriers to awareness, but you think that what you're doing is the right way. And so you strengthen the wrong way, thinking it's the right way. You think that it's a person there, but it's really just a lamp. You think that the program that you've decided is the program for how to avoid those obstacles. You recognize that there's darkness, but you think you see clearly what's ahead of you. And you don't. You're confused. Wow, we could give a million examples of this. It isn't enough, right, that they don't see the truth, to see the evil that is, or that which is unskillful right in front of their faces. He says it's not just enough that you don't. It's like it would be one thing, he says, if you would be in the dark, then maybe there's a chance to wake you up. But you think that you're awake, and that your wakefulness is true wakefulness. So you would even come up with all kinds of excuses, and your denial is such that you really think that you're on the right program. You have it under control. So it's one thing if, like, I guess, coming back to our 12-step analogy, it's one thing that if you're completely, you're not even anticipating being sober whatsoever. You're not even trying to argue that you're sober, right? But you don't realize that there's such a thing as sobriety, or you don't even think you have an addiction, let's say. So you're like, what addiction? I have no addiction. And you just keep going on, and you might hit rock bottom, and the whole thing might come undone. But let's say you become aware slightly that there is this thing called darkness. You're you're addicted, but you think you have it under control. Like, I only have one drink, or I only have 5, but I got it under control, right? I might be an addict, but I think I got my own program. I figured it out myself. And you come up with all kinds of. Is even more difficult than the first one. That's even more difficult to change, says the Ramchal. He quotes a verse in Isaiah where, where the prophet is saying that we've become fat, our ears have become heavy, our eyes have turned aside. Let that happen, lest they, let them think that they're on the path so that they can be rudely awakened. וכל זה מפני היותם תחת החושך וכבושים תחת ממשלת יצרם, אך אותם שכבר יצאו מן המאסר הזה הם רואים האמת לאמיתו ויכולים לייעץ שאר בני אדם עליו. He said, this is because those people who are walking in the dark, who are been conquered, so to speak, through this, under the sovereignty of this thing called the Yetzer, the evil inclination, the unskillful voice, the unwholesome voice. They're the ones that are either in the darkness for one of these two reasons. But the only ones who can give good advice are the ones who are out of the dark, those who are enlightened, those who are awake. They're the ones who can give us good advice on the right way to walk. And now the Ramchal on page 40 is going to launch into a beautiful allegory, an analogy rather. To a garden maze, a labyrinth. These kind of garden that are common. He's talking about labyrinths. In the royal courts have these mazes. That the trees or the plants they are planted in rows, right? Their walls are walled rows. You can't see over them, right? And and they have pathways that are confusing and perplexing and mixed together. And the whole purpose of them is to reach a portico that's in the midst of this labyrinth. There are paths these paths that are true, that will actually bring you straight to the portico. And there are some that are designed to confuse and cause one to go astray or to be lost, to wander. But when you're in the middle of the labyrinth and you're walking on a path, you don't know whether or not your path is a true path out or whether it's a deceptive path. For they all are equal. There's no difference between them to the naked eye. There's no way to know how to get out unless you've gotten out. But someone who's already in the portico, he can see all of the paths and know which ones are the true paths and which are the deceptive or the false ones. He can warn those who walk in them and say, this is the way to go. But someone who trusts that one we'll get to the right place. But one who doesn't have faith or doesn't trust in the one who's already made it there, that will go and will be lost and will never make it. I want to say that I don't entirely agree with the Ramchal here completely. I think it is possible for a person to find their way, but we all need teachers. We all need people who have walked ahead of us to some degree, who will invite us onto the path. We shouldn't take anything on face value just because people who have been there. But we have a repository of great mystics and saints universally across religious denominations and religious affiliations, all of whom have said that beyond this material world, there is another world where the eye of the mind and the eye of the spirit hold sway. And that mindfulness, the practice of mindfulness, is an invitation to see into the deeper nature of this world. So, ushmartem et hamatzot, ushmartem et mitzvot, that this week before Pesach, where matzah is to be watched over so carefully so that it doesn't rise. I want to bless each and every one of us here with the strength of awareness to be mindful of our actions and mindful of our intentions, and to bring a really powerful energy of mindfulness into our lives, into the moments of our lives, to be present to the choices that we make, and to begin to keep lists, internal or even better external lists of activities in our life that lead us towards this portico and those that don't, and to try to find as we continue to study the paths and the various supports and the various teachers who have made it to that portico, to that center of this great maze of life, who can give us advice and give us tidbits of wisdom in order to help us avoid some of the pitfalls of living in this world with all of its confusion and a lot of its pain. But may God bless us with a liberation this Pesach, a liberation for our hearts and our minds, for you and your families, and for all of your loved ones. I wish you a Chag Kasher v'Sameach, a sweet and delicious holiday of liberation. Many blessings.